Okay. So we are really just trying to get through, wrap up with the Courageous Conversation book, and then move on to what do we do with this newfound capacity. So I still didn't feel like we really closed out chapter 10 well enough. So we're going to go back to chapter 10 today, the chapter that was on the sixth condition, talking about whiteness. And then we will skip over chapter 11. And the next time that we have one of these sessions will be chapter 12. So staying in, Martha just disappeared. I was like looking at Martha. Okay. So looking at chapter 10, I am just wondering, well, first, actually, I guess I will revisit where we've been because we have been on break, and I think it will be good to just get some context. So a window, this one, share. So I think we've talked about this the last couple sessions, including the board retreat, but we started out, we're unpacking this book, Courageous Conversations about Race, and it is intended to help to build our capacity, give us some tools so that we can engage in deeper conversation, deeper interracial dialogue about race. And we started with these 4 agreements: staying engaged, experiencing discomfort, speaking your truth, expecting and accepting non-closure. And I feel like we have really been modeling those things in our board meetings. Our cabinet has been doing the same thing in the cabinet meetings, and our leadership team meetings are a little more spaced out and sporadic. So, but we have talked about these in that space, and I think that as we continue to have these conversations, that leadership team will be really embedded in these agreements as well. We also try to, as often as possible, start by finding our position on the Courageous Conversation Compass. When we're talking about any particular issue, this compass is really intended to help us recognize where we're starting from, where the people that we are speaking with are starting from, so that we can make connections and relate and understand perspective a little bit better by using this as a resource. And then we started working our way through each of these 6 conditions. Starting with those first 2 are really about getting the introduction, initial engagement with the topic, focusing on ourselves, personal, local, immediate, isolating race, and then moving on to how do we sustain the conversation, engaging multiple perspectives, trying to be aware of which voices and perspectives are not present and making sure that we create space to surface those, and then monitoring the agreements, making sure that we are holding ourselves to the 6 conditions, to the 4 agreements, that we're using the resources that we've learned in order to do this. And then we did our 5th condition was where we identified our 3 C's, to be very clear about what we mean by race. And then the last few times that we've met, we've been on this subject of whiteness. And with the topic of whiteness, where we kind of left off before was on these 4 aspects of white consciousness: universal perspective, individualism, avoidance, and decontextualization. And so what I'd like to do is just make sure that we're in the same place about these. So starting with just universal perspective, which is just this assumption sometimes that the values, cultural experiences of white folks are just the norm. The question that I have for you with regards to that is, what's been your experience with interacting with that? If you're white, how has that impacted your relationships with others? If you're a person of color, how do you confront that when it shows up?
So remind me what the question is.
Just how has universal perspective, the way that it's talked about in this book, or the way that it's summarized on this slide? What's been your experience with that? Is that something that you have seen in your experience, and is it a part of your story at times? That sort of thing.
I think it is. I think certainly when I was growing up, I didn't pay any attention to the issues faced by people of color, primarily because there were no people of color in my community. And that's just how it was. I grew up in central New Hampshire, and it's pretty darn white in central New Hampshire. And then when I moved to Southern California, I started to become aware of the inequities faced by persons of color. And then when I moved up here and got involved in the schools and with the school board, I became more and more aware that the systems really are unfair to persons of color. They are treated inequitably, and there are a lot of systems that are really rigged against people of color and benefit the white culture and white people. And this training has helped a lot in how to talk about that. I've been aware of it for a while, but I didn't know how to talk about it. And this has really helped me learn the language. It was like being dropped into a foreign country and trying to navigate and not knowing the language. So I guess that's probably it.
Okay, so I'm just gonna put the 4 of these on the screen. And first, I just ask, because we may be able to push a little bit ahead, is there any one of these that folks still have a question about? Don, I'll just start and ask you, is there any one of these that you have a question about, or that hasn't really been made clear?
No, I all of it is clear and precise for me. No questions about any one of these 4.
Norm?
I had to find my mute button. The only one I think I'm just not have firm grounding in is the concept of decontextualization. And it probably means I need to go back through and just read through that again and see, what does that mean? How does that operate in how I live and how we work and how we live? So
yeah, let's take a look at that one. So I'll pull up the slide that we put together on it. It's really decontextualization is really talking about reluctance or inability to see race as a factor in a given situation. So an example, I was meeting with a team of teachers a few weeks ago, and one of the staff members, I asked them to think about, what's your earliest experiences around race been? What were some of the early experiences? And one of the staff members said, well, I didn't really think about this as a racial experience at the time, but my kindergarten teacher, they sent me home with a note, and the note said, don't send her back to school until you have given her a name that the teacher can pronounce. And so, and the dad, he did not resist that. He just gave another name that was going to be easier for the teacher to pronounce. And she, came back to school, and this was in kindergarten. And now she's a staff member at a school, and she's looking back on this experience and saying, like, well, maybe it was a racial issue. And the staff that I was working with, we had a huge discussion about that. And there were people on both sides of that who saw it just as, well, we need names that we can use. And it included folks who have asked people for easier names, and it included folks who have given up their names so that people can more easily pronounce their names. But the question of race had not been for it seemed like to any of the people that were engaged in that discussion, the subject of race had not been a central aspect of their thinking related to that particular issue. And so that's what decontextualization does, is like, we're talking about this subject and we don't consider, is race or racism a part of this or not? When we remove that, then it becomes, that's what it is. So it gives those examples of like Black Lives Matter, war on drugs, education reforms, housing loans. I had someone say, well, housing, that's nothing racial about housing loans. They have a formula for that, and they have a system for how they do that. But there is, right? Like, we know that. And we know that if there's redlining that's taken place, then generations later, there'll still be impacts on the value of homes because of that redlining. So to think about housing right now and the costs and home values without considering the lens of race, that would be decontextualization, where we have just eliminated this as something that we consider. Incidents that take place with the police, there's a tendency of, in my community and the Black community, immediately to bring up race as a subject of what took place. There's also a tendency on other parts to try to eliminate race right away. It could be, we don't want to have that. And so this is really saying, like, that is a part of something we need to consider as a part of whiteness, is that tendency to take this issue and to look at it without that race being a lens.
That's a great explanation. That's helpful. I think the concrete examples help a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? I asked Norm. Raymond, how about you, Art? Did the discussion of these four make sense to you in the text?
I'm trying to recall the discussion. I know I missed the last session, so I'm kind of behind. I'm just trying to remember what those individual terms mean. So
yeah,
I'm still trying to do that. So
okay, I'll touch upon the individualism and the avoidance, just to help out with that. So on individualism, this sense of, I earned this. People that have more have it because of their hard work. People that have less have it because they have not worked as hard. And if they worked harder, they would be able to access it. Lack of recognition of the benefit of the overwhelming presence of other white people in positions of power and influence. So in the book, he talks about the fact that when you are in a community where you are highly represented, as a lot of, especially in education, white people who are educators are participating in a professional community where they are the dominant, there are connections and hidden benefits from being a part of that community that you don't really realize. But if you were dropped into a community where you were the only white person and there were largely people of color, then you would immediately become aware of the difference. So it's just pointing to the fact that white people sometimes don't recognize the sense of comfort that is automatic when you're in a space where you're widely represented, that other folks take. They definitely, like, I will say for myself, when I'm in a space where I'm the only Black person, I definitely am aware of my being the only Black person there, and there's certain feelings that my white colleagues don't ever have to experience because they're never in that sort of an environment in a professional setting. But then it talks about some of the things that we do that emphasize individualism, like tests are individually based. We talk about the importance of doing group work and collaboration, and those are skills that kids need in the future. But a lot of the things about the way that we test, the way that we call on children, those sorts of things still emphasize individualism, even when the skill that we're trying to build is much more collective or collaborative. And then avoidance, I think all of these are really interrelated, but this isn't really a problem. This isn't a problem. Or whataboutism, like what about when this happened to, or can we talk about gender, or can we talk about something else? I'm trying to avoid the initial discussion. So I think avoidance and decontextualization are really similar, except for decontextualization is really emphasizing the idea that this is an issue to where race would have is a lens that will provide some additional insight to really understand this situation. Like when we're talking about the name thing, the impact of people giving up their names ends up being a loss of languages, right? So we want to make sure and hold that. I have a person that I really admire who is Native, and he's working very hard to try to reclaim his language. And I think that honoring names is one way that we can help to honor languages. So those are those 4 pieces. And then I gave you this article, 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture. And so I don't know if folks had an opportunity to look at that or not. So let me just check and see. Did you guys get a chance to look at this? So I guess off of this list, are there any that particularly stick out or seem like they are a challenge that we face more frequently in educational circles?
Well, off the top of my head, I would just, there's a lot of them that are there. I think perfectionism, defensiveness about being criticized, quantity over quality, only one right way to do things. I think there's still some paternalism that exists in the educational system, though I think that it's more equal nowadays, gender-wise than in the past. Either or thinking, fear of open I mean, they're almost all there to some degree. But it isn't, to me, when I was reading this, those characteristics, they're very true of white supremacy culture, but they're also very true of much of corporate culture in America. And I don't want to offend anybody, but it is also, I know that in this group that's on the screen right now, we have a significant number of people that are part of religious organizations. But my own experience is part of organized religion. And I'm not talking spirituality, I'm talking organized religion. There's a lot of these that are characteristics of organized religion, regardless of the religion.
Thank you.
Yeah. I agree with Norm on those that he read off. And one of them that really gets to me is worshiping the written word and not allowing people to do their storytelling of their experiences. And a lot of this is happening in religious organizations. Religion incarcerates, relationship liberates, for me. And it's a spiritual battle. It's a spiritual thing, right? And I think we are going through that, but a lot of these are happening in school systems across the country. And And my way is the only way. That, you know, that's a big one for me, because there are other ways, right, to come and to overcome this, and just to come out of your comfort zone, and not fear. Don't have no fear of open conflict, because you're going to go through conflict every day. But if you go through it with fear, then you already defeated. You're not trying to work through it, and it's, you know, and any process is going to be is bigger, but it's how you go through the process that makes it smaller and makes it more obtainable for me.
Any others? And cabinet folks, feel free if you have a thought about something on this list as well. I think it'll add some insight. My dogs are going nuts, so try to keep the discussion going.
Martha can give you some hints.
That's why I have the headphones on. I keep, my dog is going nuts. There's a UPS truck outside, so.
Martha, what about you, for anything on this list that really resonates or sticks out as something that we're dealing with more often?
When I was going, I mean, I, like Norm, look at this list and I think, oh yeah, that's, I see that, and I see this, and I see this other thing. And but what really struck me was only one right way. I think sometimes we get stuck in thinking that there's only one right way to do something, because that's how we do it. And when in fact there's probably any number of ways to do something, and that doesn't mean that one is more right than the other. But I think it's maybe more human nature to think that there's only one right way.
Yeah,
I have one comment,
go ahead.
and it probably would fall into a lot of these, but there's this feeling of anti-laziness, like others are lazy, whites are not.
Yeah, I think that shows up a lot in that individualism thing that we were talking about before this, and then definitely in some of the things here around perfectionism or progress is bigger. You can't really sit in the situation and let it kind of just be. You have to be doing and doing and doing.
Anthony raised his hand too.
Okay, Anthony?
It's funny, I raised my hand for a different thought, but Kirsten, that you said that, I need to share with you all that when my ex-wife told her parents that she was bringing me home to be introduced to them, and she made a point of letting them know my heritage because she feared that there would be some sort of issue with it. And I walked in the door to greet them. There was obvious tension. And why I'm chuckling when you said that, Kirsten, is because my ex-mother-in-law, the first question she asked me was, did I intend to work? And I was floored. You know, I was 27, 28 years old. I had a career. What do you mean, do I intend to work? Is this a question you ask typical people, your friends, or was this something only because she made such a point of stating, I'm bringing home my potential life partner here. She was my ex-wife. Anyway, sorry, it happens. The right to comfort. Marcus, you asked the question. Several years back, when I was with my former organization, I went to Detroit to give a training. And it was the very first time in my life where I was the only non-Black person in the room, not just once, but for the entire week. And I had never felt uncomfortable before, no matter what people are coming in and out of the room, just because, just because. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles. There were lots of different races. I'm used to, the proverbial melting pot. But after a week of being the only non-Black person in the room, I got a feeling of what it must be like for you, Marcus, to be the only Black person in the room. And it was different. And I did not know what that was like until it happened after a long sustained period of time. And some of the things that people would come up and say to me, like, why are you here? I mean, going to IHOP and having the whole restaurant stop talking the moment I walked in the door, and everybody just looking at me. It was like, well, this is uncomfortable. And then, literally people saying to me like, wow, I can't believe you did this. And I'm like, well, why? I'm hungry. But it's those little things that you take for granted, and we take for granted the right to feeling comfortable most of our life. And I think it's an experience everybody should have, to be placed where I really was just such an odd duck. No comment, Trevor. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think with that, right, to comfort, that's one that really, well, I think with all of these, it's important for us to remember that these are not characteristics of white people. These are characteristics of a white culture. And so some of what white supremacy culture. And so some of those things that what Norm was saying is like, well, it's present in the corporate. Yeah, because that's the culture of the boardroom. It's present in the religious because that is the culture of our places of worship quite a bit. It's present in schools, right? And people of color internalize and perpetuate these things in the same way that white people internalize and perpetuate these things. When I'm in a space to where I don't agree with Superintendent Green, my first thought is don't say anything, because I want to keep him comfortable. And then I have to challenge that in my mind to say, that's not really why he asked me to be on this team, is to keep him comfortable. He wants to hear that. So I have to be willing to say what's different. And even if that's going to make a space uncomfortable. But they internalized, don't disagree with people in authority. Don't shake the boat. Don't try to do it in the way that's going to be the least disruptive or the least off-putting. That's something that we all experience in these spaces and have to one degree or another. Raymond?
The lens I'm using is more organizational development lens. That's kind of my background. So I don't know, I don't know, maybe I'm way off, but I see this as old school leadership and culture that perhaps continues to exist today in 2020, 21. I've been part of organizations where the leaders have been Hispanic, Black, white, and they practice some of these norms, I guess. So, but successful organizations and school districts are no longer following this white supremacy culture. They're changing that. And so that's where I kind of see, I know our school district, we don't practice a lot of these, maybe at some levels, maybe some lower levels, but at the top levels, we're not engaged in this culture. So, we're more engaged in the servant leadership, more shared leadership. There's not one right way to do things. I'm quoting, I think his name is Drucker, that there's all kinds of ways to do things, and everybody can share and cooperate and contribute to decision making and coming up with solutions. So I know it's still practiced today, but if you look at some companies like Starbucks, Harley Davidson, and so forth, they've gotten away from this white supremacy culture and thus have become more successful. So I'm kind of looking at it through that lens. I know some of these things like perfectionism is good as a student, right? We want to learn the material, especially if you're a doctoral student, master's student. You have to have kind of that characteristic or that personality to be perfect, because it demands that level of education demands it. So just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think there's definitely attention, and there is definitely work that's being done in organizations not to operate by some of these things. I also think they show up in ways that we don't often recognize. I would suspect that, so if I were to say like Starbucks as an example, they have a lot of things that they're doing that are really forward, but I would suspect that you could transfer an employee from any Starbucks in the country and drop them at another Starbucks, and they would already be pretty well trained on how Starbucks is run, because there is only one right way to run a Starbucks, right? And so, and that may be because they believe it's going to get a certain result that they want, but that is an aspect of this that would show up in that sense, right? Where there's not a lot of opportunity you probably can't all kind of reinvent how you're going to do at your individual places, because we want it to be a certain way that people come and can expect. And so I think,
well, using that logic, we could say the same thing about a new curriculum that's introduced to teachers, right? There's probably one way to use the curriculum. There's only one way to prepare to take the exams, the state exams. I mean, using that logic, we can say a lot of things, right? So I don't know.
That's what I'm trying to do, is say that this culture shows up in all kinds of spaces in ways that we don't recognize, including in school. So those are great examples of how schools say we're moving away from this, but we perpetuate it. Like every student taking the same test is exactly an example of what we're talking about here, and something that we would want to be thinking about. Is this necessary in this particular context? It's not to say that it's always bad. Like, I like the fact that if I want to stop by and get a Starbucks drink, I know that wherever I stop, it's going to be the same drink. Like, I depend on that. So it's not to say that it's always bad. These elements are always bad, but we need to definitely be questioning them and considering them, and how are they showing up. And they show up in ways that we don't always think about. With curriculum, that's an example of paternalism. When we tell every teacher to do it the exact same way, here's the materials to use them these ways, we're going to show up in your class. I was in one school where the principal could show up in your class and they expect you to be on the same lesson as every other teacher of that subject matter, right? That is paternalism. Now, maybe there's benefits of why they want to do it that way, or maybe there is some room that we need for folks to be able to say, like, well, the kids in my class need something different and I can deviate in these ways. But it's just the ways that this kind of thing shows up. Or even we don't want to make a statement to our families about how we're going to do X or Y, because we want to make sure that we have it exactly perfect the first time that we communicate, right? These are all things that it shows up in all of our work. That's why I started with an example of me. It shows up with me in spaces where I'm tended to bite my tongue, don't say anything because you don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But disagreeing and being uncomfortable is a part of this work together. So yeah, I think there's great work that's being done to not do this. There's also, it shows up all the time.
So Dr. Pimpleton, I'm just kind of thinking about what you said. So I know that the school district has nothing to do with standardized tests and how they're composed, and there's state and federal laws that we have to comply with and have to achieve in order to receive funding. So would you say that part of that has to do with pressure to meet certain goals, or how would you see that if teachers are having to feel the need to be on a certain part of the curriculum, and then the principal feels pressure that the school needs to have higher test scores because the board is demanding and the superintendent is demanding higher test scores? Is that racism, or is that pressure from the system that might be racist? Or I'm just trying to, I'm more of a big picture person, so I kind of want to understand it from that perspective.
Yeah.
So
I think when we're talking about characteristics of white supremacy culture, when we're talking about how these things show up, we need to be asking ourselves, how is this playing out? How is it serving us? Is it helping us? Or is it not serving us well? And when we talk about racism, again, that definition that I'm using is this going to widen disparities between racial groups, or is this going to reduce disparities between racial groups? And sometimes the thinking about why we're doing a certain thing a certain way is it has an anti-racist intent. Like the reason that the schools that I've been in where they're like, we're going to make sure that our teachers are all teaching the exact same thing, is because they want to make sure that every student gets exposed to the curriculum and the content, that there's not gaps in what's being taught. It's because they want to eliminate disparities between teacher A and teacher B and that sort of thing. So it's an anti-racist intent a lot of times with why we're doing things the way that we're doing. All that I'm saying is we need to be questioning why we're doing things the way that we're doing them all the time, because we may find that this particular thing that we're doing is not serving us well. So I'm not making a statement against a school that's deciding we want to make sure that our curriculum is all the same. I'm not saying that. I'm not making a claim about this is always harmful and these are all examples of where it's harmful, because I don't think it's all necessarily always harmful all the time. But when you let anything kind of just go and dominate and take over the situation, that's where I think that you're running into some trouble, and that we need to be asking ourselves about it. I had a friend over and we argue about a lot of different things. And every time we argue about something, he goes and looks up what other people said about it. So he's like on the computer and we're sitting there having a discussion about, I'm like, well, this is what I think and how I feel and blah, blah, blah. And he's looking up and he's like, do you know who so-and-so is? I'm like, no. But he's using like wanting to quote so-and-so and point to so-and-so, right? It's a worship of a written word, right? And so in cultures where people are not writing doing as much writing, or not availing themselves as that, they're not publishing the way that they're thinking about these things, they're engaged in the work, then what's written isn't always reflective of the wide diversity of ideas out there. And so it's just, so I just pointed out to him, like, that's a characteristic of white supremacy culture, where you're always trying to look up what someone else said instead of really, like, that can be useful to you formulating your opinion, but it's not necessarily going to be useful when we're discussing something, because I know what I think and believe about this. And so the examples of why this person thinks and believes different might be useful, but that someone else said X, Y, or Z, maybe not so much. And I was working with a Quincy team, and they had, like, outside of their community, somebody put up All Lives Matter sign, huge All Lives Matter sign on the road, and they put Bible verses underneath it. And we were just talking about in a meeting with them a couple weeks ago, how, like, why did they put those Bible verses on there? Because it's this worship of the written word. Like, by making Jesus the person who supposedly said all lives matter, then it gives credibility to this phrase that's really intended to minimize the voices of folks who are saying we have a problem in our Black communities and we need to stand up for Black lives. So yeah, I don't know, that was a roundabout way, but all of these things, they are present in our systems, in all of our systems. We're indoctrinated into these things, and it's important for us to keep looking at them. The other one I would point out is objectivity, is this idea that, okay, we're going to go in and have this discussion and we're going to be objective and pretend that we don't have a point of view coming into the conversation. And that happens all the time, where we're having conversations and we're pretending that we don't already have a point of view that we're bringing. And what I would highlight in the article is, what are some of the antidotes? Like, what are some of the alternatives to this sort of thing? And to make sure that those things are also showing up. So when we talk about objectivity as one, being clear about where the prejudices that we are bringing to the conversation, why we see things the way that we do, where that comes from, that's an alternative then to pretending that we're being objective about a topic. So I want to say, when we're looking at this list, not just we're looking at how do we reduce our reliance on these things, but what are the alternatives that we can bring in to bear. Any other thoughts? We got about 7 minutes left in our conversation. Trevor, can you say something? Say something.
Absolutely, Marcus. The one that kind of resonates with me is the fear of open conflict, and I think that it's interesting because I think you see that play out in education quite frequently. I remember when I was working across the table in HR with another individual who's actually in the room right now, Anthony, and he would get frustrated when he was engaged in conversation with me as an educator and the perspective of educators of not being able to being polite to the extreme and not saying what is meant, or not kind of diverging from any type of conflict or tough conversation. And I do see that one perpetuated quite frequently in education, where we equate a disagreement with kind of rudeness, or not being able to have the discussion. And I think that was really the first time in my career that I'd really recognized, because I've been an educator for quite a while, and this is my my profession since my early 20s, and then being across from a Teamster saying, why don't you just say what you mean in education? Why don't you just come out and say what the issues are, instead of always talking around the issues because you're afraid that people are going to live in this discomfort and you're going to offend somebody, and that's causing even more of a greater issue because of the lack of clarity. Anthony, do you want to follow up on that at all, or you're good?
No, I think you nail it. Sometimes being direct is considered being rude. When how do we know what to do if you're not clearly laying out the expectation for the employee? So avoiding the clear and concise instruction or expectation, in my opinion, is what creates more conflict than just stating, here's what we need from you. And yeah, that was a perfect example, I think, of ongoing perpetuating the conflict as opposed to just addressing it.
I think partly that arises because in our culture as a whole, we have this tendency to attack the person instead of the issue. And then even if someone is attempting to attack the issue, the person who holds maybe a different viewpoint receives it as being attacked as a person and not as dealing with the ideas or dealing with the concept. And so we continually have to work at, in our communication, is, am I addressing the issue, or am I in some way going after the person, either intentionally or unintentionally? But I think it's just creating awareness around that and having the courage to deal with issues up front.
Yeah, thank you, Norm.
Becky, say something.
Oh, thank you, Marcus. I don't necessarily have anything different to add to what's already been discussed from that list. I think it's all very very relative to what everybody has already said. So I apologize. I don't have anything more profound to say for you, but I do agree. It's really, all of those words certainly are worth a deeper thought process and understanding.
Thank you.
On this journey that we're on. So thank you.
Thank you. So I will stop there. For, as I said at the beginning, our next conversation, we're gonna jump to chapter 12, which talks about what does it look like to be trying to apply these to a strategy for improving schools. And so we'll talk about kind of the ideas in that particular text. Also, if there's time, hopefully I'll be in a place to be able to share with you recommendations with regards to an equity audit that we're hoping to do in the fall, which is really figuring out if our notion of equity is about eliminating disparities, what are the disparities that we need to address? And those will be very broad ranging, not just in student assessment results, which is where we have a tendency to go, but are there disparities in our employment? Like the diversity of our workforce, who we retain, those sorts of things. Those will be things that come up. Climate issues, we talk about family and student responses to climate surveys and things like that, but looking at perceptions of the school experience, all of those sorts of things. So we will be talking more about that hopefully in the next session. If not, the next session will at least be on chapter 12, and then perhaps our first session in May will be on, where do we go from here. But I really appreciate you all for the dialogue and for not expecting perfectionism, because this is definitely a learning work for me as well. I appreciate everyone digging in to the conversation, and I think that we are better positioned for some discussion around the results of an equity audit because of the work that we've done up until this point. So thank you all.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Marcus. These discussions are really enlightening, and I appreciate everybody giving of their time to go through this process. I think it will only help inform the board and the cabinet on future direction for the district. I'm going to suspend the meeting until 4:30, where we'll pick up and start our real meeting. And so just a 10-minute break, 9-minute break. We'll see you guys in a bit. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I can't tell if everyone's here or not, but we'll get started. This is the April 12th meeting of the Yakima School District Board of Directors. I'm going to ask Jennifer to make a roll call for us, please.
Sure. Donald Davis Jr.
Here.
Graciela Villanueva is absent today, I believe. Martha Rice.
Here.
Raymond Navarro Jr.
Present.
Norm Walker.
Here.
Thank you.
As has become our custom, when we start every board meeting, we do a land acknowledgement. Don, are you prepared to read the land acknowledgement today?
Yes, I am, with great honor.
Please proceed.
With great honor, I have the privilege of reading the land acknowledgement. Today, the schools of the Yakima School District rest on the ancestral lands of the 14 Confederate tribes and bands of the Yakima Nation. The people of the Yakima Nation inhabited more than 12 million acres across Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Franklin, Grant, Kittitas, and Kitikat and Yakima counties. Today, we honor those Native peoples who are tied to the land through history, legends, and culture. We acknowledge their descendants who live in the world today. We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to live here since time immemorial. An acknowledgement is a simple, powerful way to show respect and a step towards correcting the stories and practices that erase indigenous people's history and culture. It also honors the truth. As a school district, we will continue to build upon our relationship with the Yakima Nation.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is our Pledge of Allegiance, and we have a very special guest with us today, Ace Federspiel. Is that how you say your last name?
Yes, pretty close. Federspiel.
Federspiel. It was a 50-50 chance I would hit that, right?
It's all right, but yeah, it's going to be a tough act to follow, Mr. Davis. But I'll do my best here. If you're willing, please rise and remove your hats for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You can take your seats now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ace. That was a great way to start the meeting. Is Ryan here, Trevor?
I do not see him, but it looks like we have Jewel here from Davis.
Okay. Jewel, do you have anything that you'd like to share with us about Mr. Federspiel?
I have not met him in person yet. I'm, kind of new to Davis still, but he's a great student. I know that much just by looking at records.
Ace, would you like to share with us? You're a junior, right?
Correct. This is my junior year.
So what are your plans?
Well, hopefully I'm going to continue in the IB program, graduate with a diploma. After that, I'm just going to try my best to find a 4-year degree giving university and get involved there. I'm not quite sure yet on which one, but we'll get there eventually.
Do you know what field you'd like to pursue?
Well, not really. It would be an honor to get involved in business or something to that effect. But outside of that, not particularly.
Well, good. I'm going to give our board members an opportunity to thank you for being here today, and they may have some questions for you as well.
Oh, for sure.
Okay. Raymond?
Yes, my name is Raymond. I just wanted to thank you, Ace, for being with us today and leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I really like your first name. Ace is a cool name. And I might suggest a career for you. Since you have a great voice, I think you would excel in the media, anchor, news reporting, those type of things, related jobs. So you just have an awesome voice that when you speak, I think everybody listens. So just a suggestion, but nice meeting you and thank you for being here today.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'll definitely consider it.
Don?
Yeah, Ace, thank you for being here today. I like that Ace of Clubs that you put up. It goes with your aura. And I too would like to see you in broadcast because you do have that voice like mine that gets attention. Keep it up, man, and keep up the great work in the AB program. I've seen you around, Davis, and you're a very sharp young man. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Norm?
Well, just congratulations on your success so far, Davis. And I have a quick question for you. Hopefully, we'll be back in school in person next fall. Is there anything in particular you look forward to being back in school in person?
Well, one thing for sure is going to be the consistency, I think. Only going 2 days a week, it's good. It's definitely better than nothing, and strictly online for sure. But getting to go to see all of my friends, hopefully, and not just half of them, that's what I look forward to the most.
Well, I wish you well. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And I would echo their appreciation for you being with us today, Ace. You represent Davis very well, and I wish your principal was here so that we could thank him for submitting your name and being a part of this. I look forward to actually seeing you at graduation next year. And maybe you can just stay in touch and let us know how things are going.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a pleasure to get to participate.
Well, you're welcome to stay. We do have a bit of business to take care of today, but I understand completely if you have other things that are calling you and demanding your attention, like dinner or homework or something like that. So feel free to stay, but if you do feel the need to leave, we completely understand.
Oh, thank you. I do have a track practice that I'm missing out on right now, and I might get back into that. I drove back here to lead the pledge, and I think I might have to sign off and get back involved.
Okay, well, make sure that your coach knows where you were.
No, I just left. No, I let him know. We're all good. We're all good.
Okay, well, thank you for being here with us, Ace. Take care. Good luck.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Well, that was fun. Okay. Next on our agenda is an approval of an appraisal agreement. Trevor, do you want to kick this off or go straight to Bob?
I'll kick it off a little bit and pass it to Bob. So this does have to do with appraising of some property, and I did ask Bob to look into that. So we'll find out what he came up with. I'll pass it to Bob. Bob?
Thank you. Good evening, board. So as you are aware, we're looking at potentially getting some properties to expand the healthcare centers that we currently have to provide a broader range of service for students. The state law requires that we conduct market value appraisals of any property that we may have an interest in. So in order to do that, I contacted about 6 different companies that engage in appraisals. Most of them were more than 60 days out to get an appraisal completed. Some of them were too busy to even take on additional work. So finally, I found this company, Valbridge Property Advisors, that can do it within 35 to 40 days. And because this is a time-sensitive issue, I spoke with Trevor and we agreed to enter the agreement, but the statute also requires board approval. So we're asking that the board ratify the action of entering into the agreement and approve the agreement. Essentially, the agreement is to have 2 different properties appraised for us at a cost of $6,400. And hopefully we'll have a final product here within 35 days.
Okay. The board has been appraised of this, and we have had an opportunity to review the appraisal proposal and attachments. And so I would entertain a motion. Well, first of all, does anyone have any questions of Bob? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion that the board approve the ratification of the appraisal agreement with Valbridge Properties Advisors.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Don, seconded by Norm. Is there any discussion? Okay, Jennifer, could you conduct roll, please?
Donald Davis Jr.,
Aye.
Martha Rice,
Aye.
Raymond Navarro Jr.,
Aye.
Norm Walker.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passed 4-0.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next item on our agenda is a discussion on policy 0500, profile of a graduate. 500, is that what that says? Yeah, I guess it is. Trevor, do you want to kick this off or go straight to Bob?
Well, we will make this, and it's going to be kind of Bob's show tonight. I know he's
Oh, yeah.
presenting a couple other things, so we'll go right to Bob on the profile of a graduate. Bob?
Thank you. The board will recall that the board had requested that we take the profile of a graduate from the strategic plan and incorporate it into a policy that the board could adopt. So what we did was we took basically the language out of the plan and inserted it into policy form. The 0 series, the 0580, is an available number, and it seems like a logical place in which to put the policy. And so really this is for discussion for the board to decide whether to adopt it as is or whether the board would like to make some additional changes at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. We have had an opportunity to review this, and the board will remember that we had a number of discussions with the facilitators when they were here helping us with the strategic plan. And the board was asked to develop or create a list of those characteristics of a graduate from the Yakima School District. And this policy it's kind of the drafty draft of a policy that we had talked about putting into place so that it has some consistency with the with the work that we do and aligns the strategic plan into our policy process. So I'm wondering if board members have any comments or thoughts or questions about what we see in this document. Raymond, do you have anything?
Not at this time. I was reviewing them as we're speaking. So
Yeah. Right
It
now,
looks-
it's just, go ahead.
Excuse me. It looks fine to me.
Don, do you have any comment?
I went through it and it looks just great to me. It just like what you said, Martha, when we did the strategic plan, this is one of the things to come up with the policy. And I think it hits right there on what we need to do. And it has all the steps.
So I'm thinking, I'm trying to remember, Martha, the strategic plan, the specific parts of that, and I'm seeing that in this document. So I'm good with this version of the policy.
I'm wondering if board members would see value in kind of fleshing it out a little more so that it's not just more or less a bulletized list. Or is the list sufficient to get across the ideas that we spent all those hours discussing?
I think the list, the way it is sufficient. It hits every point.
Just a thought I'm having, Martha, when it comes to our core values, the first bullet says diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because of the focus of the board on equity, perhaps equity could just be one bullet and then diversity and inclusion another bullet. Just a thought, and just to place more importance or more focus on equity.
Either that or equity could be first in that list.
Yes, that's what I was referring to.
First in that, or so
In order.
equity, diversity, and inclusion,
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
not a separate.
as opposed to equity being standalone.
I would go along with equity first, then diversity, and then inclusion.
So just rearranging the order of the words.
That's
Yes.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Do you think we need to have definitions? I mean, I think we know what we were talking about, but will people who weren't in the room with us know what we're talking about?
I think that would be helpful because we did, I think last year, year and a half ago, or maybe even 2 years, the board did come up with a definition of equity. And so we might have to update that version or that definition and perhaps include, that with this document also, what is diversity and inclusion? What do those mean? So I'm for that.
What about the rest of the list under those specific items under profiles of a graduate? Do you think that when someone reads resilient learner, think about people who aren't necessarily in education and steeped in the vernacular of education, will they know what that means?
Well, I think the bullet points underneath pretty much clarify that. I think I'm okay with that, and I'm not because the document's about the graduate. It's not the equity statement. I'm not sure we need a long statement about equity in this document. That's a repeat of the kind of the core values, but this document is not the statement of the core values. It's the statement of the graduate profile. So I'm not sure we need to go into deep detail again in this document for something that's in another document. The document about equity would have a much more detailed explanation about equity.
Well, and you'll note at the end of the document, there are references that will need to be included. And
I'm all for keeping things as simple and straightforward as possible and not loading them up with long explanations. I think that it paints a pretty clear picture, and that's what it is. It's the picture of the graduate. I don't think it needs to be a lengthy document like some policy documents need to be, but I'm not sure this one needs to be. I think it fits the bill.
I agree with Norm. It works just as it is written.
with just those switching those words around in that first bullet.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with equity being the first part of that sequence. Sure.
Yeah, just switch equity around to first and diversity and then inclusion.
We have a number of policies that we'll probably want to include as references at the end of this one. And I don't know if there would be any legal references. Bob would know that better than I. If there's anything in the RCWs or WACs that would need to be included as a reference to this. Maybe something in WAC, like some of the rules that the state board has approved for graduation requirements and such like that. That's what comes to mind immediately, but I'll defer to Bob on that.
I agree. I can find those references and include those. And then in terms of cross references, I'll pull those up as well and add those.
Okay. Is there anything else on this agenda item that board members wish to share? So we'll let Bob go forth and kind of flesh this out a little bit and bring it back to us at a future meeting for first reading. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Martha, I did have, I don't know, I'm getting caught up in that first part, the resilient learner. I mean, growth mindset and persistence. And just, you know, just the discussions we had been having with Dr. Pimpleton in terms of white culture and norms and so forth. You know, what does persistence mean? That you, despite whatever you face, that you're gonna continue on, you're gonna pick yourself up by your bootstrap, or you're gonna work harder, or I don't know. So that Dr. Pimpleton just has me thinking a little bit more on these terms, right? That I think he said, I'm quoting or I'm misquoting, that do policies or what we have written, do they expand or narrow the discrepancies between our students? So, and I know this is not a policy, it's more of a profile, but the policies will feed into this profile.
This is one of those big overarching policies that we have.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's kind of like the big umbrella kind of thing.
Yeah. And what does a growth mindset mean? I mean, you can overcome everything, even racism, is that what we're telling our students? Or if our schools are, in fact, have institutional racism, are they going to persist? Are they going to overcome? Are they going to continue with their goals? I'm just kind of, and those are just my thoughts. I'm not trying to change the terms here or the writings.
Well, we'll have an opportunity when Bob brings this back to us at first reading to maybe have a deeper discussion about the terms, and if they are terms that folks who aren't in the educational world would understand, and maybe include not all of the terms need to, I don't think certainly all of the terms don't need to be defined, but there may be a few that need to be defined so that people will understand what we're talking about. But we'll have time when we have it presented for first reading to have that discussion, and hopefully Graciela will be here with us at that point. So, okay, Bob, do you need anything more from us on this?
No, I think I have the direction, and I'll bring back a first draft.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for pulling this together. Okay, next item on the agenda are monitoring reports. So the first one is the monitoring report for 1000.2.0, Global Executive Constraint. And this is the Bob No Show. So not that Bob is a no-show, but you kind of know what I mean. So Bob, do you want to review the monitoring report for this one?
I do. I'll see if I can share it on the screen.
Trevor, did you have anything to add before we start?
You did great. I was just going to introduce Bob. I did ask him to go ahead and present on this and also 1000.2.9. So thank you for introducing Bob. I'm glad to have him presenting tonight. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is global executive constraint 1000.2.0. Says the superintendent will not cause or allow any practice, activity, decision, or organizational circumstance which is either unlawful, imprudent, or in violation of commonly accepted business and professional ethics and practices. Further, the superintendent will abide by all negotiated agreements or rectify any violations as expeditiously as possible. Imprudent means without thought of the consequences and lacking in judgment or caution. We deem that the superintendent is in compliance here. The interpretation for this is, I interpret this to mean that the district must have appropriate policies, practices, internal controls, i.e. supervision, evaluation, mentoring, training, legal consultation, discipline, complaint and grievance procedures, investigation protocols, external compliance reviews and audits, and that it will follow all the RCW and WACs of the state of Washington. The purpose is for the superintendent and staff to avoid unlawful and unethical or imprudent behavior by its staff and or volunteers in the performance of their duties. It also requires the organization to remediate any and all discovered conditions should they occur as quickly as possible. In terms of evidence of compliance for the monitoring period here, October 2020 through April 2021, I certify compliance. Specifically, the superintendent and administrative team have addressed the following items. Controls internal. We continue to review, update, and implement policies and operational procedures as required by law or to effectively operate the district. All administrative policies and operational procedures are aligned with the legal requirements of ESEA, Title IX, IDEA, EPA, WSHA, OSHA, RCW, and WAC. Violations of policy or operational procedure are appropriately addressed and handled when they occur, either in the building or district level. Harassment, intimidation, and bullying HIB report for October 1, 2020 through March 25, 2021 identified 3 reports, of which 0 were found to be cases of HIB. This report supports district evidence in tracking, investigating, and preventing future issues. The grievance log shows there are 5 grievances for 2020-21 year, with 3 closed out and 2 still open. We monitor all internal fiscal controls. The superintendent/designee communicates with association leaders on either a regular basis or as needed to address issues related to the collective bargaining agreements. All known concerns regarding employee conduct have or are being addressed. Training of all administrators related to prevention, investigation, and remediation of unacceptable employee conduct was provided. Training, mentoring of all administrators related to employee evaluation was provided. Training on harassment, intimidation, and bullying was provided to all leadership team members. Public records requests are processed through the district's public record office. Employee training occurs annually through the Safe School System, staff meetings, and YouTube for safety and McKinney-Vento trainings. Job/position specific training occurs for bus drivers, food service, custodial and maintenance staff, YPTA, paraeducators, and secretaries. Coaches, volunteers, and parent trainings occur at the start of each athletic season. Customer service training was provided to secretarial and counseling staff. Let's Talk provides a way for students, families, community, and staff to have their questions or comments addressed. We currently have a score of 8.3 out of 10 for service and have processed 4,236 dialogues. Controls external. No external audit findings for the 7th consecutive year were reported during May 2020 exit audit for the year September 1, 2018 through August 31, 2019, and support district confidence in the district's fiscal management. the Washington State Accountability Audit Report results for September 1, 2018 through August 31, 2019, published May 4, 2020, support the district complied in all material respects with applicable state laws, regulations, and its own policies, and provide adequate controls over the safeguarding of public resources. The Washington State Financial Statement, looks like there's a typo there, but the Washington State Financial Statement and Federal Single Audit Report for September 1, 2018 through August 31, 2019, published May 4, 2020, support district confidence in internal controls and financial management. We continue to implement the OCR resolution agreement. And that's it for that.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any questions from board members? That was a very complete list, so thank you for that. We will submit this for the board survey. Jennifer, can you tell us when that will go out and when you need it back?
Yeah, all 4 of the ones for this evening are going to be due April 30th. They're not next up until May 10th, so we've got a little time.
Okay. I would encourage board members when you get them to fill them out, because it's real easy for these things to get buried in our email boxes and we lose them. So thank you for that. Next on our agenda is the monitoring report for 1000.2.9, communications and support to the board. Bob?
Thank you. When I tried opening this one earlier, it came up as a Word document. So I'm going to try to open it now and present it now, but it may take a little bit of doing on my side. Hold on 1 second while I do that.
Yeah, that's the way I found it too. It wasn't a link. It was just a Word document that I had to save to my laptop.
Okay, I think I should be able to present this. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this is a 1000.2.9 communication and support to the board. The superintendent shall not fail to appropriately inform and support the board in its work. And we have deemed that the superintendent is in compliance with this. The interpretation here is that the superintendent shall demonstrate a regular pattern of providing essential decision and monitoring information to meet the board's work needs. The information is based on a reasonable anticipation of the work needs of the board in cooperation with the superintendent and the operations of the school district. Because the board's composition and informational needs change over time, this work will always be based on a dynamic set of understandings. In terms of evidence of compliance, all information in support of board meetings, the fulfillment of board legal requirements, board decision-making information, documentation and materials, board official documentation and records, board website and communications, calendars, workflow, and meeting logistics have been prepared and submitted in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act and all Washington state codes and laws. The superintendent and superintendent's cabinet work together to make sure the board is informed and updated on all matters of the district. Further, without limiting the scope of the foregoing by this enumeration, the superintendent will not neglect to submit required monitoring data in a timely, accurate, understandable, and factual fashion, directly addressing provisions of board policies being monitored and justifying the superintendent's interpretations. See policy monitoring superintendent performance 1000.4.4. The superintendent is in compliance here. Interpretation is the superintendent shall submit all monitoring reports on time with reasonable allowance for emergencies and unforeseen circumstances. Further, all data, information, and board materials will be presented in a manner acceptable to the entire board to support the superintendent's interpretation. In terms of evidence of compliance, to date, all required monitoring reports have been submitted on time and in accordance with the board's annual policy governance planning calendar. Exceptions being those times when the school board meetings were canceled. The monitoring reports have been accurate, understandable, and factual. Additional documentation and measures are now included based upon feedback and input from the board. Following the board's approval of a monitoring report, it's posted to the district website under Board of Directors Policy Governance for easy access by the board and the public. Second, the superintendent will not fail to report in a timely manner an actual or anticipated non-compliance with any policy of the board. We find the superintendent in compliance here. The interpretation here is the superintendent's monitoring reports must truthfully and accurately alert the board to any condition of current non-compliance or condition of non-compliance considered likely in the future, and should include a plan for incremental movement toward compliance in a reasonable time frame. Evidence of compliance is that based on existing data, the superintendent did not fail to report to the board actual or anticipated non-compliance with any policy of the board. All the monitoring reports presented thus far in 2020-21 have been accepted and approved. Third point is the superintendent will not neglect to submit decision information required periodically by the board or fail to inform the board of relevant trends. Excuse me. The interpretation here is that the superintendent shall periodically provide information, data, and evidence of trends necessary for the board to make informed decision in areas such as the following: student achievement data relative to student ends, annual district budget and budget projections, enrollment projections for annual and long-range planning, ballot measures, both levies and bond sales and debt restructuring, capital projects, school boundary adjustment and revision, real estate transactions, other information as needed or requested by the board, class size adjustments, legislative impact, OSPI and state board direction, other information as needed or requested by the board. The superintendent shall periodically provide information, data, and evidence of trends regarding student achievement data and educational standards, as well as best instructional practices. Evidence of compliance. The majority of these items and matters arise on a cyclical basis. School board minutes document information provided in support of the board's work throughout the year. Applicable state laws, RCWs, and WACs are not violated. The annual reports to the board provide information regarding student achievement data and best instructional practices. Many of our Monday meetings provide the board an opportunity to be informed of the most current programs and district plans to meet the board's district goals and Washington state requirements. Item number 4, the superintendent will not fail to advise the board of any incidental information it requires, including anticipated or pending media coverage, lawsuits, material internal changes, staff initiatives, significant changes in district policies, operational procedures or programs, new major contracts, or significant contract changes. The superintendent is deemed to be in compliance here. The interpretation here is the superintendent shall provide incidental information as agreed upon by the board and superintendent, so there will be no surprises. Superintendent will keep the board informed through emails, meetings, written documents, and/or telephone calls by the superintendent or designee. Evidence of compliance includes the superintendent's routine communications, monthly meetings, emails, phone calls, etc., to the board are designed to meet the no surprises standard as it relates to litigation, personnel matters of a sensitive nature, personnel changes, matters likely to result in media coverage, and student safety and welfare. Superintendent sends email updates to the board that keeps the board informed of new requirements of this, keeps the board informed of new or ongoing items of interest and information of a non-confidential nature. Meeting the requirements of this limitation, the superintendent is supported by his administrative assistant, chief communication officer, members of the superintendent cabinet, and occasionally members of the leadership team, building principals and directors. The superintendent provides confidential reports to the board and executive in closed sessions, specifically pertaining to topics as outlined in state law, RCW, and WACS. Updates are communicated to staff and public through the district website, YSD app, social media, and more traditional outlets, including mass media. Fifth point, the superintendent will not fail to develop an annual calendar of topical areas of presentation to the board to include, but not limited to, special education, highly capable program, migrant and bilingual education, athletics, transportation, food services, and guidance and counseling. Superintendent is deemed to be in compliance here. The interpretation is the superintendent shall provide reports and presentations to the board regarding various programs, initiatives, and departments throughout the district. Evidence of the compliance includes the superintendent has coordinated presentations for the 2020-21 school year to include discipline, PBIS, early learning, and monthly superintendent updates at business meetings. Plans to engage in study sessions around these topics were postponed due to COVID-19. The board was committed to addressing equity for the 2020-21 school year in study sessions from November through May 2021 and has been doing so, with the option of infusing or decoupling these topics within the discussions. Item number 6, superintendent will not fail to advise the board if, in the superintendent's opinion, the board is not in compliance with its own policies, particularly in the case of board behavior which is detrimental to the work relationship between the board and the superintendent. See governance process 1000.3 and the board superintendent linkage policy 100.4. Superintendent is deemed to be in compliance here. Interpretation. The superintendent has the responsibility to bring matters to the board's attention if, in his opinion, any board behavior is not in compliance with board policies. Superintendent shall handle all board non-compliance in the same manner complaints are brought to staff and remedied when and if possible with the individual board member or members to which it applies, as well as bringing it to the attention of the board president. If an individual matter or the infraction is of the entire board, it shall be brought to the attention of the board as a whole. Evidence of compliance here is the superintendent discusses all issues related to the board with the board president to seek a guidance and direction. All matters were successfully managed. Board discussions with the superintendent effectively provide dialogue and opportunity for improving policy governance and the roles of the participants. Item number 7, superintendent will not fail to present information in unnecessary, complex, or lengthy form, or in a form that fails to differentiate among information of 3 types: monitoring, decision preparation, and other. The interpretation here is that superintendent shall submit all written and verbal reports or information in a manner which is brief, concise, and to the point, distinguishing between reports to be used to oversee operations, make decisions, or solely for informational purposes. More and more information and evidence will be web linked for easier access by the board and community whenever appropriate. The evidence of compliance here is the superintendent updates and reports, including emails, are complete and timely. The superintendent and his staff are responsive to the board. The superintendent and his staff are continually seeking ways to improve reporting to be more concise and provide greater clarity. To date, the superintendent has received no board concerns regarding information prepared by staff that was unnecessarily complex or lengthy. Of particular note is each building's school improvement plans and school presentations to the board are tied with the district's strategic plan and compass. Item number 8, the superintendent will not fail to provide a workable mechanism for official board officer, or board committee communications. The superintendent is in compliance here. Interpretation here is that the superintendent will provide systems that will facilitate a reliable flow of information between the board and the superintendent, board president, or other officers and superintendent. I also interpret this to mean that the superintendent shall make available to the school board any requests regarding equipment and/or staff to assist in committee communications. The evidence of compliance here is that systems are in place, including verbal, hard copy, and electronic mechanisms to assure clear communications between the board and the superintendent, board president, or other officers and the superintendent. Equipment and staff are readily available to assist the board when needed. Item number 9, superintendent will not fail to deal with the board as a whole, even when fulfilling individual requests for information or responding to officers or committees duly charged by the board. Find that the superintendent is in compliance here. The interpretation here is that 5 individual elected board members comprise the board. If the superintendent provides information which has been requested by one board member, it should be provided to all board members. I further interpret this to mean the requests, suggestions, or direction of one board member shall not be treated as a directive to the entire district, but rather redirected to the board as a whole for considerations. With new and updated technology, mail and information are electronically scanned and delivered via email to board members. Evidence of compliance. Board information and materials are provided in hard copy and/or distributed electronically the same way at the same time to all members. Board files are kept in the superintendent's office to provide for traditional mailed materials and correspondence. Superintendent shares with the board opportunities for attendance at conferences that are designed for professional growth. Item number 10, the superintendent shall not fail to supply for the board's consent agenda along with applicable monitoring information, all decisions delegated to the superintendent, but which are required by law, regulation, or contract to be board approved. Superintendent is in compliance here. Interpretation. Superintendent shall advise and include consent agenda items that fulfill the board's legal, contractual, and regulatory responsibilities. I also interpret this to mean that if the superintendent complies with all of the board's executive limitations, he is authorized to proceed to take actions without prior board approval. Evidence of compliance. All administrative policies, personnel actions, contracts, and other actions requiring board approval are routinely placed on the consent agenda for board action. Background information and executive limitations materials are also provided to inform the board and prepare them for action. At this point, there are no recommended changes to the policy. And that completes my presentation on this.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any questions from board members? Seeing none, thank you, Bob, for that very complete presentation. Jennifer has let us know when we will be seeing this and when they have to be returned. So if there are no questions on this one, we will move to the next item on the agenda. Okay. Next item on the agenda is policy governance review by board members. And this first one is for policy 1000.3.1, governing style. Do I have a board member who wishes to lead us through that? I've gotten really good at wait time, guys. You can either volunteer or be voluntold.
I can volunteer, but I'm having trouble with the screen. When I pull up the document, then I lose everything else. So anyway, here goes.
Okay.
Thank you, Norm.
Okay, governing style. The board of directors will govern lawfully with an emphasis on A, outward vision rather than an internal preoccupation, encouragement of diversity in viewpoints, strategic leadership more than administrative detail, clear distinction of board and superintendent roles, compliance with all appropriate and applicable district policies and procedures, collective rather than individual decisions, future rather than past or present focus, I think should be in there, and proactivity rather than reactivity. Okay, accordingly, the board will cultivate a sense of group responsibility. The board, not the staff, will be responsible for excellence in governing. The board will be the initiator of policy, not merely a reactor to staff initiatives. The board will not use the expertise of individual members to substitute for judgment of the board, although the expertise of individual members may be used to enhance the understanding of the board as a body. Number two, the board uses an agreed upon policy governance model as the model under which it conducts its governance responsibilities. The board will direct, control, and inspire the district through the careful establishment of broad written policies reflecting the board's values and perspectives. The board's major policy focus will be on the intended long-term impacts outside the staff organization, not on the administrative or programmatic means of attaining those effects. In other words, ends, not the goals. The board will enforce upon itself whatever discipline is needed to govern with excellence. Discipline will matter to matters such as attendance, preparation for meetings, policy-making principles, respect of our roles, ensuring the continuance of governance capability and compliance with board protocols. Although the board can change its governance process policies at any time, it will observe those currently in force scrupulously. To ensure that all board meetings are conducted with maximum effectiveness and efficiency, members will do their homework and ask questions. No policy is kept current and posted on the district website. Review pertinent materials before meetings. Ask questions if they do not understand an issue. They will listen with an open mind, listen to the issues and ask questions. Remember, good communication means talking and listening. Avoid surprises. If a board member wishes to bring up a controversial issue, discuss it with the board chairperson and superintendent before bringing it up at a board meeting. Make building trust an important team goal. Put the team and team goals first. During meetings, make decisions that support the goals of the district, not individual interests. Follow board protocols, be present, and avoid distractions unless otherwise directed or approved by the board president. Secure cell phones and avoid emailing, texting, unauthorized recording of meetings and discussions, and use of social media during meetings. Display good manners. Watch your manners, your tone of voice, and body language. Show respect for one another. Support the majority. Once the board makes a decision, support the decision and work to make it a good one. Do not sabotage the rest of the board by publicly second-guessing the actions of other board members. Disagree, but disagree agreeably. Note, board discussions in public meetings on an item prior to vote, including divergent opinions, are recorded in the board minutes. Do not make snap decisions. Hurriedly passed motions usually do not get the consideration they deserve. It is better to table a motion until the next meeting than to pass one that the board will regret later. Do not take action on non-agenda items brought to the microphone or meeting without the superintendent's recommendation or study. Discuss the issues. Do not digress, repeat, argue, provoke, or reminisce. Do not engage in side conversations. Do not play to the audience or monopolize the discussion. Support the president's efforts to facilitate an orderly meeting. Value equal participation of all members and the perspectives they represent. Continual board development will include orientation of new board members in the board's governance process and periodic board discussion of process improvement. The board will allow no officer, individual, or committee of the board to hinder or be an excuse for not fulfilling group obligations. Monitoring of executive limitations will be included on the agenda for purpose of monitoring organizational compliance. As a rule, members will direct any questions or concerns to the superintendent prior to official public presentation. Throughout the year, the board will attend to consent agenda items as expeditiously as possible. Any item may be removed from the consent agenda by an individual member for discussion or action. Any board member may request an evaluation of the board's process and performance of a meeting. More thorough self-monitoring of board performance will be scheduled and conducted according to the board's annual calendar. Self-monitoring will include comparison of board activity and discipline to policies in the governance process and board to superintendent linkage categories. The board, by majority vote, may revise or amend its policies at any time. However, as a customary practice, a proposed policy revision will be discussed at one session of the board prior to its being approved at a subsequent board meeting. And finally, the board will observe the confidentiality of closed or executive sessions. Discussions held in closed or executive sessions are not to be discussed with anyone else other than the board members, superintendent, and legal counsel.
Thank you, Norm. Are there any questions or comments from board members? Norm, do you want to ask Jennifer to insert that word focus in that first paragraph that you read?
Yeah, I believe that was probably a typo. That should be part of that statement.
Okay.
Do you know where we're talking about, Jennifer? Okay.
So that will come back to us for first reading. We may want to look more specifically at that policy to see if there's anything else that we would like to consider adding or adjusting within that policy when we get it for first reading with that editorial change. Okay. Thank you, Norm. I know that that's a long one, and I appreciate you stepping up to take care of that. But it is one of the more important of our policies. The next one is 1000.4.0, Global Governance Management Connection. Do I have a volunteer to lead us through that one?
I'll
I
do
can
it.
do that one.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Raymond.
I'll defer to you.
Don, you have it.
Raymond, you got it. Go, Raymond, go for it.
Okay, if I must. So this is policy 1000.4.0, Global Governance Management Connection. States that the sole or the only and official connection to everything that has to do with the district and achievements is through the superintendent. Also that the team operates in a group and a team manner that involves open communication, and none of that communication can be considered to be instructions or requests directions to to district members. And so everything basically needs to go directly to the superintendent. So.
Thank you, Raymond. Are there any questions or comments on this one from board members? Okay, all four of these will go into the survey, and Jennifer will coordinate that and just ask that board members respond within the identified time frame. Okay, next item on the agenda is the superintendent's update. Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, President Rice. As far as the update, just to announce that the governor did roll back to phase 2 in 3 counties. Ours was not one of the 3 counties, so certainly wanted to flag that for all of you. We are not moving back, but we will have a report later on about what the actual count is. Second item to share with you is actually that Superintendent Reichdahl did pay a visit to the district, not the Friday, but the Friday right before the break. I was headed out of town, and Dr. Darling graciously stepped in and facilitated that meeting. And I would ask him to report on the events, also acknowledging that Stacy Locke was part of that process, as well as Dr. Pimpleton. Dr. Darling.
Good evening, board. So yes, so as Superintendent Green shared, I spent most of Friday hanging out with Chris Reichdahl, Superintendent of our Office of School Public Instruction for Washington State. We started off the morning at Hoover Elementary, which is always a gamble with Principal Sanchez, because you know that Principal Sanchez has his own agenda despite what he tells us is going to happen. But the day ended well with Principal Sanchez and Superintendent Reichdahl scoring off in a game of soccer out on their pitch with a couple of students. It was actually quite enjoyable to see, especially some of our students that are in our self-contained student skills program, and they really enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun. So we visited several classrooms. Stacy was there, and she discussed some of the COVID issues and challenges we face specific to the district around contact tracing and the lack of finding just services to support our needs of the district our size. And then after that, Superintendent Reichdahl and I headed off to Davis High School, where we met with Principal McDaniels, and he showed off their Student Wellness Center and answered several questions about the programming, the partnership with Yakima Pediatrics. And then we visited the classroom of Megan Anderson Riley, who is our Regional Teacher of the Year. And she had asked students several questions throughout her classes and the class that we were in, specific to COVID, some things that they shared with him. And it was really interesting, some of the data they shared about how many of them are working full-time while still going to school, how many of them have parents or family members who have been in contact with or tested positive for COVID, are going to be vaccinated. And he had some Q&A with them, and I think it was really telling for him to hear from their perspective on the way they've been impacted, and how many of them would choose to never go back to remote learning if given the option, because very few of them said they would prefer remote learning. They were very clear that they really liked being in person. Some of them said they liked the options of being able to flex, the options of doing both. But most of them were pretty clear about their feelings on being in person. After that, Director Pimpleton and I had lunch with Superintendent Reichdahl. Of course, we had tamales from down the road because you can't come to Yakima without getting tamales. And we talked about a lot of the legislative focus from the district. We talked about more of the concerns that the struggles that we have with remote learning, the struggles we have with transitioning back, some of the challenges we face that our smaller compadres don't face around us, around serving meals to students with the 6-foot social distancing guidelines. And I think it was kind of eye-opening for him to see at Davis, where we have about 2,600 students, and they have a cafeteria that I believe will serve 600 with 0 inches of social distancing, and the impact that would be to require 6 feet social distancing for 2,600 students, and the mathematical challenge we would face with trying to serve lunch there. We know that the governor has required districts to return to at least 30% in-person learning, and our current hybrid schedule falls a little bit short on that. And we talked about our schedule and the challenges that we face if we were just to increase 2 hours to meet the 9-hour minimum, what that impact would be and how that would involve so many different departments. And so those are some of the conversations that we had. He asked about our plans for spending the ESSER funds, and I told him, don't worry about it. We've got every penny already spent. We went into some of the conversations, but we also shared some of the challenges we face, where even if we did want to increase our teacher workforce, we can hire as many teachers, we can post as many teacher openings as we want, but there aren't that many teachers to be hired. And we're very landlocked here in our valley as far as, bringing in new nursing staff and bringing in new teachers and then you'd have to hire new administrators to cover all the new teaching staff that you have on. And so there's a lot of challenges that we have over here, this side of the mountains, that our Western Washington districts along the I-5 corridor don't face. And those are the ones that he hears a lot from. But it was a good time. After lunch, he spent about half an hour just one-on-one with Megan again, talking about some of her ideas and some of the proposals that she makes around how to improve our services for our English language learners. Obviously, that's a very passionate area for her. One of the reasons why she was nominated for Teacher of the Year, because she's very impactful at serving those students and reaching out to their families. And then following that, we met with, and Martha, you were on this meeting, we met with Dr. Pimpleton, and is it the Superintendent Student Advisory Council? Is that the name of it? Yeah. So we met with them, and they shared some of their questions. They got to hear, they prepared some questions for Superintendent Reichdahl, and he asked them some questions in return, and there was a great Q&A back with them, and he got some real candid responses from them around the pros and cons and challenges they face and next steps, desires to make things better. And so I think he got a very authentic view of the Yakima School District that day. I got to bend his ear quite a bit. We talked a lot about just our kids and his kids and the realities of being dads and working in this job. And he talked about his frustrations of being middle management. But all in all, he left here with a very clear understanding, I believe, of the challenges that we face that are unique to us and the struggles and challenges that we face that our districts around us do not face. And so I think I'm grateful that Megan had him come, and I think it was really beneficial for him and for us to be able to get our messages across and have that two-way dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Darling. President Rice, do you have any comments, knowing that you were part of the session with Dr. Pimpleton?
No, I think the kids did a great job of sharing their perspectives with him, and he had some hard questions for them, and they stepped right up and were not at all shy about answering them. So it was a good opportunity for him to hear from our students.
Well, thank you, Dr. Darling. I appreciate that comprehensive report of the visit of Superintendent Reichdahl. I did call Julio, and the only thing I learned was that Julio beat him at soccer. So I learned much more through your report there. Thank you.
There was quite a bit of elbowing and flopping happening on that pitch. And so Julio earned a yellow card, got reprimanded, and then moved on.
Thank you. And board members, if you have not had an opportunity to see the mini pitches that were put in, one at Hoover and one at Adams, it would be great to take a look. And I'm sure that both of our principals would be happy to take you around and see those wonderful additions to their campus and the community. The final thing that I'll share with you from the superintendent's report comes from Ridgeview Elementary. 16 artworks were acquired by the Washington State Arts Commission in partnership with the Yakima School District for Ridgeview Elementary, their curated collection. So they are part of the state art collection, and the funding for this collection was made possible by OSPI K3 class size reduction grant, which funded the construction of additional classrooms at Ridgeview Elementary as well. So we have here you see on the screen some examples of the artwork. Actually, this is the actual artwork sent to us today by Casey. The art selection committee was comprised of Neray Collins, a second grade teacher at Ridgeview, Trina Hosapian, the assistant principal, Brittany Jones, PTO president, Shelley McDonald Hoke, fourth grade teacher at Ridgeview, Casey Mitchell, the principal, and Maria Reyes, kindergarten teacher at Ridgeview. So as you see, can you take us through there maybe one more time? We can kind of see the artwork that did go up in the facility.
Very pretty. I look forward to seeing it in person.
Wonderful. And we do want to thank the art selection committee from Ridgeview Elementary for their work in selecting the artwork, and for the support of Casey Mitchell and his team, and also facilities for making sure that we're getting everything put up and do it appropriately. So we thank everybody for those options and the success of having that artwork displayed. And that concludes the superintendent update currently.
Thank you, Trevor. Next, we've got the COVID-19 update.
Thank you. I believe it was very serendipitous, the flipping of the agenda today, because we had some of the data coming in very late. So I'm looking at Jewel. She'll be up first and hopefully can share with us hot off the press the latest information. We did add an additional slide. Thank you for that, Jewel, and she'll talk you through that new slide as well. Without further ado, Jewel.
Thank you, Superintendent Green. So our daily case count for the month of the end of the month of March, you see this big peak here where we had 98 cases in one day, and then we crashed to 6, and then we've kind of just stayed up, but not spiking as huge as we did that one day at the end of March. So as you see, we've kind of gone up and down. We're kind of leveling off at about 50 cases on average a day. Our current 14-day rate as of yesterday, they end the date, they go from Mondays to Sundays for a week. So for 2 weeks, it's 286 per 100,000. So we've gone up there. But in the 1 week case, this week that ended yesterday was a little less than the week before when we spiked up with that 1 day of a lot of cases. The zip code rate data, remember, comes out on Wednesdays. It actually came out on Thursday this last week during spring break, but we've gone up in most of the zip codes except the 98901 went down a little, but the others all went up last week in number of cases in the zip codes. Our hospitalizations have gone up quite a bit over spring break. So when we left, it was 12 and then 11, and then we stayed 19, 17, 21, 21, 21, 26, and then today we're down to 20 with 4 intubated today. Our hospitalizations have gone up a lot. Positivity rate for Yakima County, we're still kind of hovering around 10, so we're 11.9. School age cases from March 28th, so right before spring break through spring break. We're still at 15% of total cases for the county, which is good. 35 K5, 38 and 38 and 6-8 and 9-12. We had over right before spring break, the week before spring break is the way they recorded it, at 29 new students in the county, not in the district, and 9 new staff got COVID the week before spring break. This is the overall trend data for each week, set of weeks when they report it. Again, if you notice in February when we started, there was a 594 rate per 100,000. We had 17% of this county, and then we've dropped down into the 200s, and we've kind of stayed at about 14-15% of the new cases in the Yakima County being school-age students. So in February, I was really proud that my predictions were really close to the actual count. But March kind of went awry on me. So I will recalibrate next week or after this week's data, but you can see we spiked up a little above where I thought we would. You go to the next slide. We're gonna blow up, oh, back up one. We're gonna blow up this one area. Wow, okay, well, look really quick. We're gonna blow up this one area in the focus as of the end of, March to now in the forecast. Okay, now you can go forward. I didn't talk fast enough, Jennifer, I'm sorry. All right, so from the end of March and where my forecast started at the end of March, I had us going down until we started trending up after spring break, but we actually trended up right before spring break. I have not recalculated because I need at least 2 weeks of data to recalculate, new data to recalculate, but I still predict that we will trend up this week because of Easter vacation or Easter happening right before spring break and families gathering, and then also next week because of people getting back from spring break traveling. So I'm a little off on the forecast, but I still think we're going to spike up a little in the next couple of weeks. We just spiked earlier than I thought. Anyone have any questions?
All right, no questions. We'll move forward to our report from Assistant Superintendent Stacy Lott.
Thank you, Trevor. So when we look at the week before spring break, which was March 29th through April 4th, we did 92 investigations. And so you can see for the last 3 weeks of March, we were over 100 investigations a week. And again, it's been trending that way. As of today, for Monday following spring break, we had 61 investigations for today only, coming off of spring break. But the interesting part, which says that we are communicating with our parents and our school community, is that only 4 of the students out of those 61 investigations were actually at school and became symptomatic and had to go home. The rest of them were parents calling in to the nursing staff at their respective school and reporting the symptoms that the students had and received guidance on what to do next. So kudos goes out to our parent community for helping follow that guidance and to keep everyone safe. And so we're really excited that that is a following trend. So a positive test for last week before last, we had 8 students and 3 staff the week of March 29th through April 4th. If you take a look at our year-to-date weekly trend, we were down 4 from the week before. But in Jules' report, she talked about how many students, and as you can see, we've got quite a few students that are testing positive for COVID. Asymptomatic testing during spring break, we did again, as we did the week before, 37 tested 37 individuals in asymptomatic testing. They were all negative. Today, there are many people interested in getting tested coming off of spring break. So again, you've seen we've been kind of consistent. I look for next week to see this number jump up a little bit.
Any questions from board members for either Jewel or Stacy?
Martha, one thing I would like to share, we did stay in phase 3 today. What's interesting is when they do when they make their decision, there's a lag of 11 days with the positive cases and a lag of 8 days with hospitalization rates. And so when they were looking at allowing us to stay in phase 3, they were looking at a hospitalization rate of about 5.2. If they use the data 11 days out, the next count is May 3rd, that's most likely, hospitalization rate is most likely to be in double digits, as well as the positive count rate, as Jewel has suggested, may be elevated. So there is an indication that at that next count date on, I believe it's May 3rd, we may be moving back into phase 2, which will have a significant impact on indoor sports, which are set to begin at that point in time. And so I just want to bring that up moving forward, that we're not out of that roller coaster ride that seems to be occurring. And again, moving forward with that information. So thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Stacy. Any questions or comments from board members? I appreciate, Stacy, you clarifying what numbers they were looking at to move us to phase 2 or not. Because I was watching the numbers and I'm thinking, wait a minute, how did they justify that? So that's helpful. That's helpful to know that there's that lag time. I expect, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but what we see counties kind of popping in and out of phase 2 to phase 3 or phase 3 back to phase 2, given that the weather's improving and people are getting a little cabin fever and wanting to get out and socialize a little bit more. So we'll have to wait and see, I guess. What will that, you said that it may affect our spring sports. When does spring sports start? Do we know?
Well, they've actually moved the calendar all over the place. And so it's actually what we would normally call fall sports, which is going to be cross country, volleyball. It's going to be, you're going to have some sports which will be inside in a gymnasium. And when we go back to phase 2, that's problematic inside. And it also, in phase 3, we're not wearing masks outside, but it will also cause us to go back to wearing masks for the outdoor sports, as well as participants, as well as fans. And so that, like I said, that bounce back and forth, it's hard to stay on top of, you know, for spectators and stuff, to know what is expected, what is required, and what's not required, as well as our students, you know, families and staff. But you're right. I anticipate, based on a lag in how they calculate the numbers, that we may be headed back.
So it will be incumbent upon us to really be focused on communicating that to our parents so that they know they know what to expect, and to the community as well, so that if we have to curtail spectators and things like that, we don't have people upset with us because of something that's completely out of our control.
I can share with you that Sarah Cordova did send that phase 2 information, a reminder out to our high school principals today, just reminding them in the event that we go back, these are the criteria under which we need to operate. So we are trying to stay on top of that. I mean, my concern, and I think people would agree, that if we're averaging over 100 investigations a week and we had 61 today as a follow-up from spring break, I'm not sure what the end of the week brings to us. Out of that 61 today was 7 positives, 5 students and 2 staff members. And so this week might look kind of scary by the time we get done.
Yeah. Jewel, do you have something to add?
Well, just the sports seasons have moved all over. The middle of May is when we go into winter sports, which are the indoor sports: basketball, girls basketball, boys basketball, wrestling. And if we're in phase 2, those become very difficult. And that's May, I think it's May 15th to June 19th is actually fall or winter sports. So right now we're in spring and they're mainly outside, but it doesn't make a difference whether you have to wear a mask or not if we're in phase 2.
Because it makes a lot of sense to have winter sports start on May 15th. Okay. Go ahead.
Martha,
Yes, Tom.
I just wanted a point of clarification, because I'm one. Even though we are in phase 3 right now, and I'm surprised we still in phase 3, right, from the numbers, but understanding how they're using that matrix. And I think I heard you say even for the indoor sports, I thought that the kids would not have to wear masks, but the spectators have to wear masks. I'm more comfortable with having the spectators wear masks versus not. I'm very, very, right now with this climate, I wear a mask everywhere I go. Even, with having both shots, and I see people who say with misinformation, I got both shots, I don't need a mask. Yes, you do, until everybody gets vaccinated. And I just want a point of clarification. Even if we do stay in phase 3, I think the spectators should still wear masks with the vaccination. That's just me. And that's, I want us to open up fully. And we can't do it like this. If with these misconceptions on what the guidelines are and what the process is, you're getting so many different variants of information. But that's just me. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks, Don. Jewel?
Do I have my hand up again still?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a mistake.
Okay. All right. So I know that you all will keep us apprised of this, because if we do go back to phase 2, it will have a pretty significant impact on our student athletes and spectator sports and all of that. And I guess I just would like some clarification, like Don. If we're in phase 3, who wears the masks for outdoor sports? Do we know?
They no longer have to wear them outside, the spectators or the student athletes. And that was part of that conversation with the question from that parent that Paul Stevens talked with the parent, letting them know when we're in phase 2, they do have to wear those masks. And shortly after that, we moved everybody, the governor moved everybody into phase 3. And so that's where some of that confusion will lie, is if we start bouncing back and forth.
Sorry, everybody's gone on alert all of a sudden. Okay. Well, just keep us apprised, and I know that the community will appreciate any information that we can provide to them so that they don't get surprised as well. And thank you both, Stacy and Joel, for your updates. Like I've said before, and I will continue to say, these are critical for how we move forward in this really crazy time that we're in right now. Okay, if there's nothing else from board members on this, or Trevor, do you have anything to add on this?
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is fall full entry discussion. Trevor, I expect that you're going to kick this off.
Sure. The board had mentioned previously that they would like to have a conversation about what the fall could look like. I think we've learned today that there are quite a few unknown factors out there, but we also recognize that we're in a different situation now with vaccines widely available. At the same time, we know that there is a variant out there that is causing some havoc in other parts of the world. So there is still significant unknown factors that are in play. But moving forward, thinking about the fall, just personally, I would recommend moving to a full reopening, with the exception being if there were some great spike in cases or variants that we were seeing close to the beginning of school in the fall. So I'll just kick off the conversation, and I know that this was more of a board conversation, but if you're willing, we could also hear from other members of the cabinet as well. They're a little bit closer to the monitoring of the case counts.
We're also going to be dependent on the governor and or OSPI and or the State Department of Health for any rules or regs that they put into place, correct?
That is correct. And my personal belief is that the continued pressure will be political in nature, and that we will probably see an opportunity to reopen. I think that that has been demonstrated across the board, that things kind of ebb and flow depending on where we're at with COVID fatigue. And, you know, we see case counts spiking, and I still hear many people talking about how we need to, you know, go to a full reopener right now when we're seeing what we see in the case counts. So I would imagine that by end of summer, we will have significant pressure throughout the state. Not we, just the school district, but I think the governor, our superintendent of public instruction, and I could anticipate that we would see probably a full reopening approach at that point. But again, that is speculation, but that is a pattern we've kind of seen with the loosening of restrictions the longer that this does go on.
Stacy?
You know, thank you, Director Rice. I'd just like to share that one of the concerns that I have is that the variant is in our county, and students, or kids, I should say, just kids in general, are much more susceptible to that variant. And so I'm not sure, I do not have a crystal ball, but I'm just not sure how that's going to play out in allowing us to, as we go through the summer, if students or our children aren't able to get vaccinated, and what that impact might be long-term for us in the next few months.
It's kind of like a shell game, isn't it? You never know. You never know under which shell the pea exists. Board members, do you have any input on this discussion?
Yes, Martha, I think one of the main issues, and this is a discussion that was occurring at the NSBA conference as well, is learning loss, right? So I think the concern is that a lot of students across the country they're coming in 6 months, a year behind already, and now with the COVID or the pandemic, they're falling further and further behind. Special ed students aren't receiving the services that they need, and on and on and on. So I'm just wondering about that, if that's a factor that the board would consider in returning full opening, or returning to school full time with full opening. So that's one thing I think that weighs heavy on my mind, is that our students, their achievement scores, test scores, and that's not everything, but they've had low scores historically, and this is just going to perhaps, and maybe we can see some data that shows otherwise, but if we continue with the online education model, then it's just going to further worsen or widen those gaps and increase the learning loss. So that's one issue that I'm kind of thinking about right now.
Thank you, Raymond. Jewel?
Thank you, Director Rice. And I just want to say that Pfizer has submitted to the CDC approval to vaccinate 12 through 16-year-olds. They expect that approval to come forward in May and maybe start vaccinating 12 to 16-year-olds by June 1st. That will not help the K-5 students who are susceptible to this variant, as Stacy talked about, but it will help to have at least 12 through 16-year-olds, well, actually 12 through seniors vaccinated by the fall, hopefully. If they do approve that, which they think they're going to approve in May, and they should start vaccinating in June.
Well,
I was just going to add that what I'm hearing from other superintendents and the conversations that I had with Superintendent Reichdahl last week, I would be surprised if they give us the option of returning in a hybrid model. I think they'll either tell us you can offer students a remote learning option, or you can offer students your normal school day. But I don't think there's going to be an option for hybrid.
Do you think that they'll require the 3-foot distancing still?
If they do, I think they will need to lessen that distancing requirement for meals and common areas, and I anticipate that'll be the next step. They're seeing a lot of evidence and research showing that the spread in districts, when they follow the guidelines laid out by the health departments, are minimizing the spread, and so based on that information, that they're confident in the district's ability to control the spread.
Would we be able to accommodate a full return 5 days a week and still maintain any kind of social distancing?
We probably have the space in our elementary schools. Middle school and high school with a 3-foot distancing, I think that would be a challenge, because some of those classrooms have 30 bodies in them and they're not small bodies. And to require 3 feet with them, it is going to be difficult.
Okay. I think the whole board shares Raymond's concern about learning loss, which is why I'm very thankful that we managed to insert 15 days of intersessions into next year's calendar. We do have in a meeting coming up, I think we've got a presentation on summer school. Is that correct, Trevor?
Yes, I believe we do have one coming up on that.
So that will be an opportunity for some of our kids, certainly probably not all of them, but it's likely that we'll see more kids for summer school this year than we usually do, simply because of the the struggles that some of them had with remote learning. Jennifer, do we know when that presentation on summer school is coming? What meeting?
I believe that's at the business meeting this month.
Oh, so next week.
Mhm.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. So we'll maybe have some answers to options for students to address that. But I know that each of us are concerned about the loss that our students have suffered over this last year. And at this point, it's going to be a challenge, I think, to get them back to where they were, let alone advance them to where they need to be. But I think we're up for that challenge. We've got talented staff and talented leaders and parents who want to work with us and kids who want to learn. So any other comments or questions? Norm, do you
Yes,
have anything?
Martha, I do have another question. Sorry to
Go ahead.
hog up all the time, but yeah, we've been discussing the vaccinations, right? The vaccines and become vaccinated. So I'm just wondering what the superintendent's thoughts are in terms of, are we looking at making the vaccine mandatory or voluntary? So that's kind of weighing on my mind as well as other school districts, I think, are having to look at that. I know the research, not research, but literature I've seen shows that students of color, families of color are mistrust, right? And I don't know if that's the vaccine or just the whole process, and they're not taking the vaccine as people would hope or at the rates as other groups. So I'm just wondering about vaccinations, whether or not we're looking at or having discussions on it being mandatory or voluntary.
Trevor?
Yeah, currently we're looking at voluntary, so there is no recommendation at this point to even broach the topic of forcing them to be mandatory. So we're looking at the option for them to choose. I will say that we are looking at more children being able to be vaccinated coming up, but I think for us to move into a mandatory vaccination state, that would have to be something done at a greater level, perhaps a state level. You're also talking about significant barriers that could be faced in negotiation if that were an issue as well. So without pulling anybody else into the conversation, because we could probably go on for a lot longer hypothesizing around the nature of the vaccines. At this point, there are no plans to make those mandatory.
Thank you, and I do support that. Just want to let the board know.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Well, I know the superintendent will keep us apprised of this as we get closer to September. Sorry, I'm going to have to mute for a minute. I have a person who walks by my house about this time every day with a great big old bulldog in tow. Drives all the dogs in the neighborhood crazy, including mine. Okay, sorry. If there's nothing else on this, we can move to the next and final agenda item, which is items of board interest. Does any board member have anything they'd like to bring to the board's attention?
I do, Martha.
Okay.
So last week, I attended the virtual NSBA annual conference. And it was a good conference. Got to listen to some great speakers and some great presenters in the workshops. So, it is interesting how the message that we received from different individuals, equity, I think equity and school security were the two top, I believe, issues that they were discussing, in addition to the COVID pandemic as well. So, but we got to listen to Leslie Odom Jr., who's an actor and a musician. He talked about his life and how he experienced racism growing up, but he also talked about, you know, his parents having high expectations for him, lots of discipline and direction, and he took advantage of the music and arts programs at his high school, and that helped them to be successful. We talked also, let me see, I got some notes here. Listen to Sonia Nazario, who's a journalist, Soledad O'Brien, who's also a journalist. So they talked about the current influx of migrants from South America that are entering schools across the country. And they did talk about racism, but they focused more on, you know, the traumatic experience that that this group of students are currently facing. And actually, Sonia actually disguised herself as a migrant and was dropped off somewhere in South America and was jumping trains and making the path or making the journey to United States. And she said that she was almost beaten up, raped, and so forth and so on during her experience. So she talked about, and so did Soledad, they talked about traumatic experiences of migrant students coming to the US, talked about poverty, talked about family structures. I didn't realize this, but oftentimes families living in South America, Mexico, South America, will leave their children, come to the United States and live here for years and years, and then their children grow to be teenagers or older, and then the kids are now coming to United States. And when they do reach their parents, they don't have a relationship. And so it's a struggle for them. It's really challenging for them. They talked about these children not having any type of education in their countries of origin, not knowing how school works in the United States. There's a lot of culture shock. And so, you know, like in Honduras and I forget the other country, where there's a lot of gang violence, a lot of crime. So they really talked a lot about the trauma and being part of that experience and being a barrier to education. And so then there was also, let me see, an actor by the name of Tony Plana. He came to the United States from Cuba, and they happened to move right next door to a major Hollywood studio. So I guess he talked about being at the right place at the right time, right? Because he's a famous actor, been in countless movies for the last 20, 30 years. So he talked about that. And then there was a positive psychology researcher, Sean Aker. He talked about how positive psychology has been used to increase test scores and the experience of education for students. And all I attended were the equity workshops. And I think it was Mary Fatakis was a presenter in one of those. So it's good information. They talked about dismantling racism, and I'm still thinking about some of the things they said in terms of, you know, that our current school system has been developed over the course of the last 100, 200 years, and they were created to oppress students of color. There's some truth to that, I think, but that's worthy of a discussion. And so they said that all policies were created to oppress our students, all students in the United States. So in that we have to do this deep dive. So dismantling was a key word, deep dives were another key word or phrase. And they're suggesting that we examine all the policies, not only the board policies, but the policies that the superintendent is responsible for, looking at all policies, procedures. The district, in essence, examining or looking at the district from the bottom up or the top down. So that's quite a task that they're suggesting. So I just wanted to mention that that, and I believe it was a great conference, and I indeed learned a lot about some of the current issues that other school districts are facing. Now, I did have a sense of pride because our superintendent and the superintendent team is doing an awesome job in dealing with the pandemic. There's still school districts in the United States that don't have, where their students don't have connection to the internet. They don't have laptops, and they're not being fed. They're starving, and I just thought throughout that presentation that the Mall School District is doing an awesome job in those areas and really providing all the supports for our students. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Yeah, Martha, the Donald Davis in Houston ghost me. I had so much trouble getting on. You remember that, Martha, at the Marriott? He did it again. They did it again with NASBA. But I talked with Jennifer, and I was getting a lot of information, like Raymond was saying, from the readings from Soledad and all those presenters, and I looked through it, and a lot of it was on equity, and it was some great information. I just couldn't enter in. I couldn't sign in. They had us mixed up, but Jennifer and I are working on it. But I know it was a good conference. I'm upset about that. That's the second time Donald Davis in Houston to mess me up. And I know him. But I also want to say that I will be running for re-election for my position on position 2. And hopefully I can make the announcement again at our business meeting. But I wanted you guys to know that I will be running again for my position. And Raymond, I know it was a great session because I was getting calls of people asking me, "Where are you? We don't see you." But I even got to listen to several of the guest speakers over the phone. But yeah, it was a great conference. Too bad that we wasn't there in New Orleans where it was supposed to be held. But it was good. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you both for those reports. It's encouraging that NSBA was able to pull off a virtual conference. And perhaps if there are materials that you were able to get in connection with any of the classes that you went to, we can share those with the rest of the board. They usually do have pretty fantastic keynote speakers. All right. I do have one thing to share. Last Wednesday, I got an email or a phone call from Senator Cantwell's Central Washington legislative aide asking if I would be available for a conference call panel discussion with the senator and folks from around the state last Friday. And so I was able to make that happen. And there were 10 or 12 of us from around the state, teachers, parents, school board members, school staff. And we were talking about the effects of and there was a student, a 7th grade student from Freeman. The effects of this past year and what districts have done to minimize those effects. And so I was able to share with the senator information about our one-to-one program and Project Gemini and our feeding program, and a couple of suggestions that if she wanted to, she could put forward for adjusting the rules for E-rate. So I do have my comments typed out, and I'd be happy to share those with the rest of the board if you're interested. She did ask for any written comments that we had to be forwarded to her, so I've done that as well. And then the only other thing I have is the end of the legislative session is just around the corner. I think the 22nd, I think, is the sine die date, and we'll see if they can get through a budget between now and then. The Senate budget contains things that we like. The House budget contains things that we like, and usually there's not too much agreement between them. So we'll see what comes of that. Mr. Superintendent, do you have anything to add?
Nothing new to share other than what was added in the superintendent's report. Just grateful to be back here after spring break and have our students back in session. Hearing Raymond talk about where our colleagues are in other parts of the country makes me feel grateful for all of the people here in this room and our community, the service that we're able to provide, even though we know that we're continuing to evolve during this challenging time. So thank you for your support, your continued support, and for the service of every individual in this room.
I would echo that as well. We don't have a need for executive session.
That is correct. There is no need for executive session this evening.
Okay. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Okay, I see a lot of head shakes, not head nods. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, a wonderful rest of the week. Our next meeting is next Tuesday night. We'll be at Eisenhower, correct? In the auditorium again.
Yes, that is correct.